The jungle outside Da Nang was a living nightmare. Private First Class Tommy Hayes, a 22-year-old from Toledo, Ohio, felt like he was drowning in the heat. It was July 1968, and the Vietnam War was chewing up guys like him. His squad, a mix of green recruits and burned-out vets, was on a recon mission, hacking through vines to find Viet Cong trails. The air was so thick you could choke on it, and the bugs were relentless, buzzing like tiny drills. Tommy adjusted his M16, sweat stinging his eyes. His buddy, Private Jimmy Walsh, a lanky Texan with a drawl, swung his machete and grumbled, "This place ain't right, man. Feels like the jungle's watching us." Tommy didn't argue. The trees seemed to lean in, their shadows too dark for noon. Their sergeant, O'Malley, was a hard case from Brooklyn, all scars and no patience. He barked orders, keeping the squad moving. By late afternoon, they were exhausted, their boots caked in mud. That's when they found it. A stone temple crumbling and half swallowed by roots. It looked ancient, like something from a lost world. Statues of twisted, snarling creatures lined the entrance, their eyes carved deep, almost alive. "Take 5, boys," O'Malley growled. "Don't touch nothing. This ain't a museum." The squad dropped their packs, grateful for the break. Most lit cigarettes or gulped water, but Tommy was drawn to the temple. He'd always been curious, the kid who'd sneak into abandoned houses back home. Just a peek, he told himself, stepping inside. The air inside was cool, unnaturally so. Broken tiles crunched under his boots. Sunlight barely reached the walls, which were covered in carvings, strange symbols and figures with too many limbs. At the far end, on a pedestal, sat a small jade statue, no bigger than a baseball. It was a creature part snake, part something else with too many eyes that seemed to glint. Tommy's gut screamed to leave it alone, but his hands moved on their own. He slipped the statue into his pocket, its weight heavy against his thigh. Back at camp that night, Tommy couldn't sleep. The jungle was quiet, too quiet. No crickets, no wind. Then he heard it. Whispers, faint and garbled, like a radio tuned to static. He sat up, grabbing his rifle, but the camp was still. The whispers came again, louder, from the trees. He woke Jimmy, who rubbed his eyes and listened. "You hear that?" Tommy asked. Jimmy nodded, his face pale. "Sounds like people talking, but it ain't English." The next morning, Private Rodriguez was gone. His bunk was empty, his gear stacked neatly, like he'd just stepped out. O'Malley was furious, assuming Rodriguez had deserted. "Coward probably ran off," he spat. But Tommy wasn't so sure. Rodriguez wasn't the type to bolt. And those whispers, they'd followed Tommy into his dreams, muttering words he couldn't grasp. The squad moved out, but the jungle felt different, heavier. Tommy kept the statue hidden, too ashamed to admit what he'd done. That night, the whispers returned. Now a chorus, angry and sharp. Jimmy heard them too, and he wasn't the only one. Private Kowalski, a quiet guy from Chicago, started muttering about eyes in the dark. By morning, Jimmy was gone. No tracks, no sign, just his dog tags lying in the dirt. Panic set in. O'Malley tried to keep order, but the squad was unraveling. Kowalski was next, vanishing during a patrol. Then Daniels, the radio operator, disappeared while taking a leak. Each night, the whispers grew louder, and Tommy's dreams turned vivid. He saw the temple, the statue, and those carvings, moving, slithering, watching him. He'd wake up clutching the statue, his fingers numb. By the 5th night, only Tommy and O'Malley were left. They sat by a dying fire, the jungle pressing in. Tommy couldn't take it anymore. "I took something," he blurted, pulling out the statue. O'Malley's eyes narrowed, his face going white. "You idiot," he said. "You don't steal from places like that. That's old magic, kid. Bad magic." They agreed to return it. At dawn, they trekked back to the temple, the whispers now a roar in Tommy's ears. The jungle seemed to fight them, vines snagging their boots, branches clawing their faces. When they reached the temple, it looked different, darker, the statue's eyes glinting like they were awake. Tommy stepped inside, his heart pounding, and placed the statue back on the pedestal. "Please," he whispered, "take it back." For a moment, the whispers stopped. The air went still. Then the ground shook, a low rumble that knocked Tommy to his knees. He turned to O'Malley, but it wasn't O'Malley anymore. His eyes were white, blank as snow, and his mouth moved, spitting words in that ancient tongue. Tommy screamed and ran, the temple collapsing behind him. The jungle came alive. Shadows darted between trees, footsteps pounded in the dark. He didn't look back. 2 days later, Tommy stumbled into a firebase, half dead from hunger and fear. His uniform was torn, his eyes wild. The MPs thought he was high or crazy, babbling about curses and white-eyed men. They shipped him to a psych ward in Saigon, where he told the story to doctors, nurses, anyone who'd listen. Nobody believed him. Combat stress, they called it, prescribing pills that didn't stop the whispers. Tommy was sent home in '69, discharged with a pat on the back and a bus ticket to Toledo. He tried to rebuild, got a job at a factory, dated a nice girl named Linda, but the whispers followed. At night, he'd hear them, soft but clear, coming from the walls, the floor, his own head. Sometimes he'd see his squad, Jimmy, Rodriguez, Kowalski, standing in the yard, their eyes white, their mouths moving in sync with the whispers. He stopped sleeping in the dark, kept every light on. He never went near a park, a forest, anything green. The statue was gone, but its curse wasn't. Linda left when he started screaming in his sleep, and the factory fired him for missing shifts. By 1975, Tommy was alone, living in a one-room apartment, surrounded by empty coffee cans and crumpled sketches of the temple. One night, he saw them again, his squad standing outside his window, their white eyes glowing. But this time, they weren't alone. The statue was there, floating above the ground, its eyes locked on him. Tommy grabbed a kitchen knife, ready to fight, but the whispers grew louder, filling his skull. He dropped the knife, his hands shaking, and sank to the floor. The next morning, a neighbor found him. Tommy was gone, his apartment empty except for one thing: a jade statue sitting on the table, its eyes glinting in the dawn. Siu Chi, Vietnam, 1969. The tunnels were a soldier's worst fear. Dark, cramped, and crawling with Viet Cong traps. Corporal Danny Sullivan, a 25-year-old from Dorchester, Massachusetts, was a tunnel rat, the kind of guy who volunteered to squeeze into those dirt holes with nothing but a flashlight and a .45. He'd seen his share of close calls, booby traps, ambushes, but nothing prepared him for what was coming. Danny's squad was lean and tough. Private Joey Russo, a fast-talking kid from Jersey with a chipped tooth, Private Carl Buck Larson, a corn-fed giant from Nebraska, and Lieutenant Harper, a by-the-book officer from Virginia who looked too young for his bars. They'd been sent to scout a new tunnel, flicking his Zippo to light a cigarette before dropping into the tunnel. The hole was narrow, barely wide enough for his shoulders. His flashlight beam bounced off the dirt walls, revealing claw marks and roots twisting like veins. Joey followed, muttering about how he'd rather be back in Newark. Buck was next, his bulk making the tunnel groan. Harper brought up the rear, and the walls felt wrong. Too cold, like a basement in winter. After 10 minutes, they heard it. A soft hum, like a child singing a lullaby, faint but clear. Danny stopped, his flashlight shaking. "You hear that?" he asked, his voice low. Joey nodded, his eyes wide. "Sounds like a kid, man. What's a kid doing down here?" Buck grunted, saying it was probably the wind. Harper stayed quiet, but his face was pale. Danny didn't buy the wind excuse. The hum was too deliberate, too human. He pushed forward, ignoring the chill creeping up his spine. The tunnel twisted, the walls narrowing until Danny's elbows brushed both sides. The hum grew louder, now mixed with a tapping sound, like tiny fingers on wood. Joey swore he saw something move, a flicker of white in the dark, just beyond the light. "There's someone down here," he whispered, his voice cracking. Danny didn't see it, but he felt it. A presence, heavy and watching. They reached a chamber, bigger than expected, with walls covered in strange carvings, spirals, eyes, and symbols that seemed to shift when you stared too long. In the center was a small wooden box, old and cracked, sitting on a pile of dirt. Danny's gut screamed to leave it alone, but Harper, trying to prove he wasn't green, crawled over and opened it. Inside were bones, small, delicate, like they belonged to a child. A single red ribbon lay on top, faded but bright against the gray. Joey gagged, backing away. "What is this place, man?" he asked. Buck's face was stone, but his hands shook. Harper slammed the box shut, his breath shaky. That's when the hum stopped, replaced by a giggle, high and sharp, echoing off the walls. Their flashlights flickered, then died, plunging them into darkness. Danny fumbled for his Zippo, the flame casting wild shadows. When the light steadied, Buck was gone. No sound, no struggle, just his rifle lying in the dirt. "Buck!" Danny shouted, his voice bouncing back. The giggle came again, closer, from behind the walls. Joey panicked, scrambling backward, but the tunnel seemed different now, the path twisting in ways it hadn't before. "Stay together," Harper ordered, but his voice cracked. They crawled on, the air growing colder, the giggles following. Danny's lighter burned his fingers, but he didn't let go. The walls pulsed, like the tunnel was breathing. Joey kept babbling about the white flicker. "A girl," he said, "in a dress, holding something shiny." Danny didn't want to believe it, but the hairs on his neck stood up. They found another chamber, smaller, with more carvings and a single exit blocked by roots. In the corner was Buck's helmet, covered in dirt, but no Buck. Harper tried the radio, but it was dead, spitting static. The giggles turned into a scream, loud enough to rattle Danny's skull. He spun around, his lighter catching a glimpse of something, pale, small, moving fast. Then it was gone. Joey was next. 1 second, he was behind Danny, cursing. The next, he was gone, his flashlight rolling in the dirt. Danny grabbed it, shouting Joey's name, but the tunnel swallowed his voice. Harper was shaking, his officer cool gone. "We gotta get out," he said, but Danny knew it wasn't that simple. The tunnel didn't want them to leave. They crawled for what felt like hours, the giggles now a chorus, mocking them. Danny's lighter died, and Harper's flashlight was fading. The walls were closer, the air thick with the smell of wet dirt and something sour, like decay. Danny felt eyes on him, not from the tunnel but from inside his head. He saw her then, a girl, maybe 10, in a white dress, standing at the edge of the light. Her eyes were black, her hands clutching a ribbon. She smiled, and Danny's blood froze. He blinked, and she was gone. Harper didn't see her, but he heard the scream, louder now, coming from all sides. They reached the entrance, or what should have been the entrance. It was sealed, the dirt packed tight, like it had never been open. Danny clawed at it, his nails breaking, but the dirt wouldn't budge. Harper sank to his knees, muttering prayers. The giggles stopped. The silence was worse. Danny felt her behind him, her breath cold on his neck. He didn't turn, didn't dare. Instead, he dug, his hands bleeding, until a sliver of light broke through. He shoved Harper out first, then scrambled after, collapsing in the jungle heat. The squad sent to find Joey and Buck found nothing, not even the tunnel. It was gone like it had never existed. That night, back at base, Danny saw her again, the girl standing by the barbed wire, her ribbon fluttering. He blinked, and she vanished, but the giggles echoed in his head. He didn't sleep, didn't talk. His squad mates noticed, whispering he'd cracked. A week later, he woke to find dirt on his bunk, the same sour smell from the tunnel. He burned the sheets, but the smell lingered. Danny was shipped home in early 70, discharged for nerves. In Dorchester, he tried to rebuild, got a job at a shipyard, moved in with his cousin, Mikey. But the girl followed. He'd see her in the fog, on the docks, always with that ribbon. His shadow started fading, faint at first, then gone entirely. Mikey thought he was drinking, but Danny knew better. He started researching, digging into war stories, old Vietnamese myths. A buddy, a translator from Saigon, sent him a letter about a spirit, a girl tied to the tunnels, luring soldiers to her grave. "She takes your shadow," the letter said. "Then she takes you." Danny burned the letter, but the words stuck. By 1973, Danny was a ghost himself. He quit the shipyard, stopped answering Mikey's calls. He moved to a cheap apartment, kept every light on. One night he found the ribbon, red, faded, lying on his kitchen table. The giggles started again, loud enough to shake the walls. He grabbed a knife, ready to fight, but the apartment was empty. His last call was to Mikey, a garbled voicemail about a girl and a tunnel. They found his apartment empty, the door locked from the inside. The only trace was a pile of dirt on the floor and a red ribbon, knotted tight. The coroner ruled it a missing person case, but Mikey knew Danny wasn't coming back. Some nights, by the harbor, he'd hear it, a faint giggle carried on the wind. The Mekong Delta was a muddy, miserable place, and Private Frankie Miller was sick of it. A 24-year-old from Detroit, he was built for city streets, not swamps and leeches. It was March 1970, and his unit was camped in a soggy clearing near a ghost town of a village. Huts crumbling, fields empty, like the place had been abandoned for years. The Vietnam War was a grind, and Frankie just wanted to make it home to his mom's meatloaf and Motown records. His squad was a rough bunch. Specialist Tommy Gibbs, a wisecracking Southerner from Georgia, Private Eddie Salazar, a quiet guy from Texas who sketched in his free time, and Sergeant Malone, a chain-smoking vet from Cleveland with a stare that could cut glass. They'd been humping through the Delta for weeks, dodging snipers and malaria. That night, under a full moon, the air was thick, like a wet blanket you couldn't shake off. Frankie lay on his cot, staring at the tent ceiling, unable to sleep. Then he heard it, a song soft and haunting, like a lullaby his sister used to hum when they were kids. It drifted from the fields beyond the camp, sweet but sad, pulling at him. He sat up, his heart racing. "You hear that?" he asked Tommy, who was sharpening his knife nearby. Tommy cocked his head, frowning. "Hear what? You dreaming, Miller?" Frankie shook his head. The song was real, weaving through the night, calling his name. He tried to ignore it, rolling over on his cot, but the melody grew stronger, wrapping around his thoughts. It wasn't just music. It felt alive, like it knew him. Against every rule in the book, Frankie grabbed his M16 and slipped out of the tent. "Gonna check the perimeter," he lied, his boots sinking into the mud. The moonlight turned the reeds silver, guiding him toward the fields. The song was louder now, clear and beautiful, like a voice from a dream. He walked through the swamp, the mud clutching his boots, but he didn't care. The song led him to a clearing, just grass and water, glowing under the moon. The melody was everywhere, filling his head, making him dizzy. He stood there, swaying, his rifle slipping from his hands. Time blurred, minutes, hours, he couldn't tell. The song was all that mattered, promising peace, pulling him deeper. At dawn, Tommy found him, standing in the clearing, his eyes wide, his lips moving silently. "Frankie, what the heck you doing?" Tommy shouted, shaking him. Frankie didn't respond. He was humming, faint and off-key, the same tune from the night before. Tommy dragged him back to camp, cursing the whole way. Sergeant Malone was furious, threatening to dock Frankie's pay for leaving his post. "You trying to get us all killed?" he barked. Frankie didn't answer. He sat in the mess tent, staring at nothing, humming that tune. Eddie tried talking to him, offering a cigarette, but Frankie just kept humming, his fingers tracing invisible patterns in the air. The medics checked him out, figuring it was heat stroke or shell shock. But Tommy wasn't so sure. He'd gone back to the clearing, seen something odd, small footprints, like a child's, circling Frankie's tracks in the mud. The weird part? No prints led in or out, like they'd appeared from nowhere. That night, Tommy heard the song too. It was faint, drifting through the camp, and it sent a shiver down his spine. He didn't tell anyone, just gripped his rifle tighter, watching the shadows. Frankie got worse, his skin pale, his eyes glassy, like he was somewhere else. He wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep, just hummed, the sound grating on everyone's nerves. Eddie sketched him once, then tore it up, saying it didn't look right. Frankie's eyes were wrong, too empty. The next morning, Frankie was gone. His cot was empty, his gear untouched. The squad searched the fields, the village, even the riverbanks, but there was no sign of him. Tommy swore he saw him, standing in the distance, swaying under the moonlight, but when he blinked, Frankie was gone. Malone called it desertion, writing him off as another runaway. But Tommy knew better. Those footprints weren't human. The brass ordered the village burned a few days later, calling it a Viet Cong hideout. The squad watched the flames from a distance, the smoke curling into the sky. Tommy thought it would end there, that the song would stop. Didn't. Some nights, he'd hear it, faint but clear, always under a full moon. It followed him back to base, creeping into his dreams. Frankie, standing in the clearing, humming, his eyes glowing like coins. Tommy started asking questions, talking to locals through a translator. An old man, his hands gnarled like roots, told him about a spirit, a girl who sang to soldiers, luring them to her world. "She's lonely," the man said, his voice low. "She wants company forever." Tommy laughed it off, but his hands shook as he lit a cigarette. He made it home to Georgia in '71, discharged with a Purple Heart and a limp from a shrapnel wound. He got a job at a hardware store, met a girl named Jenny, tried to settle down. But the song wouldn't leave him. It came at night, under the moon, soft but insistent. He'd wake up sweating, the melody stuck in his head, Frankie's face flashing in his mind. Jenny noticed, begged him to see a doctor, but Tommy couldn't explain. How do you tell someone a ghost is singing to you? He started driving at night, blasting the radio to drown it out. Skinnerd, Creedence, anything loud. It didn't help. One night he saw Frankie, standing by the road, his eyes glowing, his lips moving to that song. Tommy swerved, nearly crashing. But when he looked back, the road was empty. The next day he found mud on his boots, the same sticky kind from the Delta, though he hadn't been near a swamp. Tommy dug into old war stories, writing to vets he'd served with. A few wrote back, saying they'd heard the song too, seen the girl. Most were gone, car wrecks, overdoses, or just vanished. Tommy wasn't surprised. The song had a pull, like a hook in your soul. He felt it stronger each month, urging him to walk into the woods to find the clearing. By 1974, Tommy was unraveling. Jenny left, taking their dog, saying she couldn't watch him fall apart. He didn't blame her. He quit the store, moved to a trailer outside town, kept the lights on day and night. The song was louder now, and Frankie was closer, standing in the yard, watching through the window. Tommy stopped sleeping, drank coffee until his hands shook. One night, he found something in his trailer. A small braid of grass, wet with mud, lying on his table. He hadn't woven it, hadn't been near a field. The song came then, louder than ever, filling the trailer. Tommy grabbed his old service pistol, checked the clip, and sat by the door, waiting. He didn't know what for, but he wasn't going out like Frankie. The next morning, his trailer was empty. The door was open, the pistol on the floor, unfired. Neighbors found mud tracks leading to the woods, small, like a child's circling the trailer. But there were no tracks leading away, no sign of Tommy. The sheriff called it a runaway case, but Jenny knew better. She kept his letters, the ones about the song, and burned them, hoping it would break the spell. Some nights, in the Georgia woods, folks hear it. A soft lullaby carried on the wind. They lock their doors, pull the curtains, and pray the moon isn't full. The Mekong River was a beast, wide, muddy, and full of secrets. Sergeant Ben Coleman, a 28-year-old mechanic from Pittsburgh, knew engines, not rivers, but in September 1969, he was stuck patrolling this watery maze. The Vietnam War had dragged him far from his Steeltown roots, and all he wanted was to survive his tour and get back to fixing cars. His squad was out hunting Viet Cong supply routes, their patrol boat, a rickety PBR, chugging through the brown water under a blistering sun. Ben's crew was a solid mix. Private Rico Martinez, a cocky 19-year-old from Miami who never stopped talking. Corpsman Sam Doc Wheeler, a bookish guy from Oregon with a knack for patching wounds. And Ensign Paul Dorsey, a nervous college kid from Maryland who clung to his maps like a lifeline. They'd been on the river for days, the heat and mosquitoes wearing them down. Ben kept them focused, his calm voice cutting through the grumbling. That afternoon, the tide dropped low, exposing a stretch of riverbed usually hidden. Rico spotted it first. A wooden door, half buried in the mud, carved with strange, swirling patterns. It looked ancient, like it belonged in a museum, not the middle of the Mekong. "What in the world is that?" Rico asked, leaning over the boat's rail, his eyes wide. Ben squinted, his gut tightening. The door was wrong. Too clean, the carvings sharp despite the algae clinging to it. "Maybe an old bunker," he said, but he didn't believe it. Dorsey, fidgeting with his compass, suggested they radio it in. Ben shook his head. "Let's take a look first." Could be nothing. Deep down, he knew it wasn't nothing. He tied a rope to the boat and dove in, the water cold and heavy, like it was pushing him back. His flashlight cut through the murk, illuminating the door's carvings. Spirals, eyes, shapes that seemed to move. Ben's skin prickled, but he swam closer, his fingers brushing the wood. A jolt shot through him, like grabbing a live wire, and the river roared with screams. Hundreds of voices, wailing from below, angry and ancient. He kicked to the surface, gasping, his heart pounding. "You good, Sarge?" Doc asked, helping him aboard. Ben nodded, but his hands shook. The screams echoed in his head, and the river felt alive. Watching him, Rico was spooked, muttering about curses. Dorsey looked ready to bolt. "Let's move," Ben said, his voice steadier than he felt. They didn't talk about the door, but it hung over them like a storm cloud. That night, anchored in a quiet bend, Ben couldn't sleep. He dreamed of a city under the river. Towers of black stone, streets flooded with dark water, and figures moving in the shadows, their faces smooth, no eyes, no mouths. They reached for him, their hands cold as ice. He woke up drenched in sweat, his bunk smelling of river mud. He checked his boots, clean, but the smell lingered, sour and wrong. The next day, Ben started sketching, his hands moving on their own. He drew the city, the towers, those faceless things, filling pages in a notebook he kept hidden. Rico caught him once, grinning. "Didn't know you were an artist, Sarge." Ben snapped the book shut, his face hot. But the sketches were gone by morning, the pages blank. He asked the crew, but nobody had touched his stuff. Doc gave him a worried look, like he thought Ben was cracking. Rico started hearing things, whispers in the water, calling his name. "It's that door, man," he said, his usual bravado gone. Ben tried to shut it down, saying it was just the river's current, but he didn't believe it. 2 nights later, Rico was gone. They found his cap floating on the water, but no tracks, no sign. Dorsey wanted to report it as a drowning, but Ben saw the fear in his eyes. They all felt it. Something was hunting them. The dreams got worse. Each night, Ben saw the city, closer now, the faceless figures chanting in a language he didn't understand. He'd wake up gasping, his hands clutching the sheets. One morning, he found mud on his bunk, black, sticky, like the river bottom. He scrubbed it clean before the squad saw, but his stomach churned. The river was following him. The squad's next patrol was a mess. The boat's engine sputtered near where they'd seen the door, coughing like it was choking. Ben felt the pull again, stronger now, like the river wanted him to dive back in. The screams came, vibrating through the hull, louder than before. Dorsey panicked, dropping his maps, babbling about angry spirits. Doc tried to calm him, but his hands shook too. They limped back to base. The door's image burned into Ben's mind. Ben requested a transfer the next day. The brass thought he was burned out, sent him to a rear base, then home in early 70. In Pittsburgh, he thought he'd left it behind. He got a job at a garage, moved into a small apartment, even started going to Pirates games with his old man. But the dreams didn't stop. He'd wake up with mud on his floor, the sketches reappearing. More detailed, more real. He burned them in a barrel, but they'd show up again, tucked in his toolbox, his jacket. One night, he found a new sketch, one he didn't draw. It showed him standing by the door, the faceless figures circling him, their hands outstretched. Ben stopped sleeping, kept every light on. His dad noticed, tried to get him to talk, but Ben couldn't explain. How do you tell someone a river is haunting you? He started researching, hitting the library, reading about Vietnam's myths. A vet he'd served with, a guy who'd studied folklore, sent him a letter. It mentioned a river spirit tied to an ancient gate that trapped souls who disturbed it. Don't go near water, the letter warned. Ben laughed, but it was hollow. The Mekong was half a world away, but it felt closer every day. By 1973, Ben was falling apart. He quit the garage, stopped calling his dad. The mud was everywhere, on his shoes, his bed, his hands. The screams were louder, waking him at all hours. One night, he heard them outside his window, voices chanting his name, mixed with the sound of rushing water. He grabbed a crowbar, checked the street, but it was empty, just wet pavement glinting under the streetlights. Ben moved to a new place, a rundown motel, thinking a change would help. Didn't. The sketches followed, now showing the city in daylight, the faceless figures closer, their hands almost touching him. He started drinking, cheap whiskey to dull the fear, but it only made the dreams sharper. One night, he woke to find his sink running, the water black and thick, smelling of the Mekong. He shut it off, his hands trembling, but the room was already wet. His last call was to his dad, a slurred voicemail about a door and voices. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. They found his motel room empty, the door locked, the floor covered in black mud. On the wall, scratched into the plaster, was a single word, "Open." The cops called it a runaway case, but Ben's dad knew better. He kept Ben's sketches, locked in a box, and never opened them. Some nights, by the Allegheny River, locals hear it. A faint wail like voices under the water. They steer clear, blaming the wind, but the old-timers know. Something's down there, waiting for someone to open the door.